Welcome into Vandy on SI. I'm Joey Dwyer. He's Tyler Jordan for our new weekly Wednesday podcast. Expect to see this every week on Wednesday afternoon, the rest of the way. The first one, though, some of you guys might want to tune out in a couple minutes in here. Going to be ugly one today. Tyler, I think, and I talked to Miami, Ohio coach Travis Steele a few minutes ago. He talked a lot about his belief in regression to the mean and law of averages, things along those lines. And I don't know that this is uh, necessarily that, but I think you're finally starting to see some of the true colors of what's going to hold this Vanderbilt team back come to light. And I don't know that we had really, I think we thought it was a possibility that this would come, but a 16-0 start makes everything seem like sunshine and rainbows. Now I think we're figuring out maybe the Final Four contender label on this team that admittedly I had put on it. I certainly think the national title contender label, those might have been a little premature here. And I certainly think, and maybe those things can change, but I think the SEC regular season title contender label is certainly kind of out the window here. Only one SEC team in the last 10 years who's won the league has lost 3 games in a row. I don't envision Vanderbilt changing that despite the league being a little bit weaker here. But Tyler, I think everything changed last night when you see them get blitzed by Arkansas and their lack of a response. They had a nice stretch in the first half. Mark Byington, though, as Graham and I covered last night, called it embarrassing and basically said he needed to make some changes. I don't know exactly what those are. He didn't seem to know either at that point, but I'll swing it to you. Just where do you think this thing stands right now? And then we'll get into some kind of underlying trends and what we think is sustainable, what we think is not sustainable here.
Well, I think the first 10 minutes of that game, really the first 5 minutes of that Arkansas game tells you everything you need to know about where they're at right now. I mean, watching Tyler Tanner miss, I think it was 3 layups in the first 10 minutes, and he's been the best player all season. And then you see that it showed how shell-shocked they were coming out of the gate. On a two-game slide, you'd like to see them start a game really hot. And it was the exact opposite of that. You said it, Arkansas blitzed them. The defensive efficiency wasn't there at all. They couldn't get a stop, they couldn't get a rebound, and then they couldn't score points either. I mean, Tyler Nickel had a great first half, but um, you look at the way you would have liked them to respond under that pressure. I think the away crowd definitely had something to do with it too, but the way they started that game shows all the problems that they need to fix. It was a lot of the similar things we kind of saw signs of against Florida. We talked about how well they played against Florida too,
Hmm.
because they kept that game so close, only a 4 point loss. But then all those weaknesses that I think probably the scouts for Arkansas were looking at it from that Florida game, saying, okay, if we do things right here and here based on what went wrong against Florida, they really exposed those, and then that's when you saw the big point gap come in.
Yeah. And I think the day after stuff is interesting to kind of not just decipher what happened, but decipher what is a real trend and what's kind of an outlier. I'll throw out a few outlier thoughts here and you can agree or disagree. I think some of the lapses in attention span on defense were really uncharacteristic, like Tyler Nickel getting backdoored. I thought was really interesting. I didn't think I'd really seen that all season. Um, I'm just looking at Vanderbilt getting cut up on defense, and I don't think that's necessarily a problem or something that they've had to deal with all year. I think some of the timidness offensively, I think that was kind of an outlier. I don't expect that to really be the case the rest of the year. Um, and then I don't know. I just think like their guards got completely outplayed, and I don't expect that to happen maybe ever again in SEC play. Those are three things from last night that, in my mind, you can basically throw out at this point. But I want to hear if you think any of those things could pop back up again, or if any of those were particularly concerning to you.
I think the defensive lapse of attention or focus is a little more concerning than the other two. I
Hmm.
agree. I don't think Tyler Tanner and Duke Miles are going to have very many nights where they're outplayed by other guards in the SEC. I think it was definitely an outlier. I mean, you could visibly see, even just watching it on TV, how frustrated Tyler Tanner was and how, like, mad at himself he was, and how like that's the most frustrated I've seen him all season with the way he was playing himself. I mean, we know he holds himself to a high standard. We know he has high expectations for himself, but the way he was visibly frustrated with himself and the way his team was playing was uncharacteristic. I don't think you're going to see that very often from him. Um, Going back to the defensive lapse of, I think that kind of can be more concerning because it shows that they have ability to have moments like that, which isn't a good thing. You want them to always be locked in on defense. You want them to always be ready to play good defense. And you mentioned they got backdoored more than they should have. I mean, one time is more than one too
Mhm.
many, but it was multiple times. Not closing out on good shooters on that Arkansas team.
I mean,
And then,
Arkansas had 5 shots probably that were wide open that they missed too. This could have
yeah,
been a lot worse.
it could have been way worse. And then, I mean, I don't know the number of times, I'd have to go back and look, but the number of open lobs, there's needs to be a better inside presence too defensively, because Arkansas was getting just 1-2 passes and throwing the ball up and throwing it down. It was too easy for them to score inside. They were slow to play help defense, and they didn't close out quick enough on the perimeter. That really would be my biggest concern of something that could come back to hurt them. Again, I don't think the guard play is too much of a concern. I think, honestly, um, Mississippi State should be worried because Tyler Tanner is going to maybe have the best game of his college career bouncing back from that because he's going to be frustrated with the way he played. Um, but yeah, yeah,
Here's some defensive stuff that I want to note. And we kind of talked about this off camera for a little bit, but it's really interesting to me, kind of the data here. And I know you've got some as well.
yeah.
They're last in SEC play among SEC teams in defensive efficiency. They are last in 2 point percentage in SEC play of their opponents, 13th in opponent effective field goal percentage. And that makes it seem like this is a complete disaster here. And then you look at some of the underlying stuff, the turnover percentage, they force the seventh most turnovers in the league by percentage. They're eighth in defensive rebounding percentage. They're sixth in opponent free throws attempted per field goal attempts, however they measure that. They're
Mhm.
seventh in 3 point percentage, seventh in block percentage, 11th in steal percentage, which really out of those is really the only underlying metric where they're below average, and third in non-steal turnover percentage, fourth in opponent average 2 point distance. Everything there to me indicates that man, that's a pretty good defensive team. And then I'm looking at it and I'm saying, wow, they are the worst defensive team in the league in SEC play, in a league that consists of South Carolina and Mississippi State and LSU. The team that we thought at the beginning could have been an SEC regular season title contender is the worst team in the league on defense right now. Here's what I make of that, and I'll swing it to you in a second to kind of dive into some of this. Um, I think some of that reflects on their physicality. If you're last in 2 point defense, I think there's a problem.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter what the average 2 point distance is at that point. I think that indicates that either they're not physical enough inside, which I think is probably our suspicion there,
Mhm.
or, and this could be both too, they're not physical enough at the point of attack when a guy makes his first step or something along those lines. I'm watching guys last night and I thought maybe Vanderbilt liked some of the shots that Arkansas took in the mid range. I think Vanderbilt is in favor of opponents having long mid range shots. I think some of them came a little bit easy last night at times too. And probably the things that I would say are the most pressing, I guess, on defense, and you can make with this if you will, as you will. I think foul trouble is probably the number one thing I have in mind right now, and I don't know that that's fixable necessarily. I think they can fix some of the technical stuff there. In
Mhm.
terms of how the roster is constructed, I don't know that there's really much that you can change with that. I think their physicality at the five is not going to be able to change all that much because if they get more physical, then their guys are going to be in foul trouble more often. Kind of a
Mhm.
catch-22 there. And I also think the foul trouble has really hurt their guard play on defense. I think it's gotta tone down Duke Miles at some point. Um, Duke Miles has got to stay out of foul trouble more than he has. And even though he didn't have an incredibly high foul total last night, he had to miss some time because he was in foul trouble. I thought that was an issue.
Mhm.
Tyler, I'm just looking at it though, and I thought there was a sense of maybe Vanderbilt's guards not playing as loose and aggressive as they had on defense and I think that's a problem as well. I don't think that they're going to stay even as one of the worst defensive teams in the league when this is all said and done. I think the underlying numbers tell you that that's probably not going to be the case, especially if they're last in 2 point percentage by their opponents and they're fourth in the distance from in which those shots are coming from. That tells you there's probably some tough makes, like Tyler Nickel had alluded to on Saturday. I still think it's a problem that you're last in the league in defensive efficiency, though. It's just how much do you think is long term and how much do you think is a byproduct of Florida and Arkansas making tough shots and being tough matchups for Vanderbilt?
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. I think last night basketball coaches always talk about when their players look like they're stuck in mud on defense, and we saw that from Vanderbilt last night. They were not moving quickly on defense. They were late. We've talked about it already. They were late to close out. They were late to find the passes. They were getting backdoored. They just looked slow. They looked sluggish on defense. And I pulled up the Evan Mia stats on defensive efficiency, and the last three games have been Vanderbilt's worst three defensive efficiency games of the season, and they've gotten progressively worse. It's in the deep blue, which means it's not good. They went from a 125 to a 134 to a 137. You want a higher number on defensive efficiency, and it kept getting lower the last three games. So it shows you how poorly they've played on defense based on that metric. Something else that's interesting to me, the best raw defensive efficiency lineup that it's giving statistics wise has Jalen Washington in the game, not Devin McLaughlin. So there
Mm.
could be something there. You mentioned the physicality inside. Maybe they're getting more physicality defensively from Jalen Washington, and it's showing on the stat sheet as well that might be a better potential matchup. If you need a big defensive stop, you might consider bringing in Jalen Washington instead. Um, yeah, it's been sad and disappointing to watch just the last three games, the way they haven't been able to move their feet. They haven't been able to close out. And yeah, you mentioned how Tyler Nickel mentioned in that post game of the Florida game, guys making shots that typically don't make shots, but you can use that as an excuse all you want. But when you're also not playing good defense on the guys who you do expect to make shots, you're not helping yourself. Um, yeah.
Here's the thing. I think and it's a good point about the last three games. I think those three games are difficult matchups for them, and I think
Mhm.
that's probably where some of that comes from. However, I think it is interesting. I look at them on paper and I think they're a lot better defensively than they are. Um, I think they have a better point of attack defender than anyone else on the roster sideline right now in Frankie Collins. And I think the expectation is that there's going to be a chance he plays on Saturday, and maybe
Yeah.
that can change some things if he's back.
Mhm.
I also think they are really handicapped at the five, whether it's McLaughlin or Washington. I think on paper, you're talking about their lineup and you're saying they've got three really good point of attack defenders
Mhm.
in the backcourt. And I think they've got two wings that, in Tyler Harris and Tyler Nickel, that can really move their feet and are long and athletic. That looks good on paper. And I think on paper, you're thinking they've got a pretty good shot blocker in Jalen Washington, although I think some of his shot blocking efficiency numbers from UNC have always been kind of concerning to me. The thing I look at is in any case, against any Power Five team, not even SEC team, which I think the SEC is probably the most athletic league and maybe the most physical on the interior, at least towards the top of the league. I think the Big Ten is probably better as you go down the league and the list of the guys in the league. Um, I just think like if Jalen Washington, I think he and Devin McLaughlin have too much pressure on them defensively. And I think that's a pretty glaring roster build issue at this point. And
Mhm.
it's not to say they didn't try to change that and they refused to recruit bigs because they recruited Mason Nicholson. But I'm looking at that and I'm saying that's not changing the rest of the year. McLaughlin, I don't think should be having to guard fives as much as he does, yet he has to guard fives all the time.
Mhm.
And Jalen Washington is a five. He's not necessarily a bruiser or anything close to it, though. That's
Mhm.
probably my biggest worry about the 2 point efficiency and that maybe not changing down the line is, I mean, we've talked about it, but they're not that much better at the five than they were last year. And the whole point of the offseason was to get bigger and more physical. Um, and they never said it was directly at the five, but I think you've got to think they were alluding to the five there.
Yeah, definitely. You would assume so based on how that went last season, and then moving into this year. trying to find guys who were going to play more physical, and you think you've done it. You start off 16-0 and you dominate teams for the first majority of the season, and then these three games in a row you get exposed physicality wise, and it really just shows maybe we didn't find the pieces we needed defensively as we thought. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if there's any strategy changes on defense. I mean, you said Mark Byington mentioned that something has to change. The question is what, and can
Mhm.
he figure out what needs to change before it's too late, before the SEC play slips away from them? You mentioned how it's looking like a really long shot that they even fight for a regular season title at this point. But can they figure it out before even the SEC tournament, what they need to do defensively? I mean, they've got a month and a little bit. They got a month and a week basically to figure it out. They have a good amount of games. They have some games that they really should win comfortably on paper coming up, especially. I mean, you play Mississippi State this weekend, one of the worst defensive teams in the league as well. So you should outscore them by a lot. But then you look at the other side of the ball. How are you defending these teams that probably don't have the best offense as well? I think that's going to show us a lot too, is how can they defend against the teams that they should be getting multiple kills on every night? And how can they make the adjustments in game to problems defensively? Because that's another thing that we've seen the last couple games is they start off well, maybe defensively, and then they get in this kind of rut where the other team figures out what they need to do, and then this Vanderbilt team doesn't make an adjustment that they need to on defense. They look like they're just shell-shocked defensively. They're still stuck in whatever set they started with, and they can't find the adjustment they need to get some more stops.
Here's one final thing I'll leave us with on defense, and this will kind of segue us. Nick Pringle, Trevon Brazil, and Malik Ewan. Ewan had 16, Brazil had 10, Pringle had 8. None of them made a three, um, and Brazil missed 3 shots. Malik Ewan missed 1 shot. So that's you're looking at 4 of 4 from Nick Pringle, 4 of 7 from Trevon Brazil, 5 of 6 from Malik Ewan. Those are 3 bigs. Those are the guys McLaughlin, Washington, and Okereke are responsible for slowing down. It didn't happen, and I think that's part of the issue here. Kind of segueing into rebounding, I didn't think last night was a rebounding loss for Vanderbilt. Uh, Trevon Brazil had 14. Arkansas rebounded them by 12, but also Vanderbilt outscored Arkansas pretty significantly on second chance points. Um, I think we've documented this pretty well, so we'll get into bigger picture stuff after this. But I still think even with that, and even with saying that wasn't a rebounding loss, I think their ceiling is still relatively limited just because I don't know that they're physical enough to hold up against teams. And we'll talk about this in a second, but I think they're matchup dependent in the NCAA tournament. And I think the biggest thing we had kind of wondered heading into this 3 game stretch was would we find out if they're not matchup dependent? And they certainly are at this point.
Yeah, definitely. Like you mentioned, I think again, we talked about it on defense, when now we're talking about it on rebounding. It's coming down to the physicality and how physical can they be? How can they out rebound teams, if at all? We really haven't seen much of that in SEC play. So can they score enough second chance points? Can they get enough offensive rebounds to compete with some of these better SEC teams going forward?
Yeah. And here's what we'll close it out on. We got to go a little big picture here. Nobody's saying they're not a good team or they're not going to finish upper half of the league or anything along those lines at this point.
Yeah.
But right now, Tyler, there's just, I mean, the path to them winning the league in the regular season is almost non-existent. I think the path to them actually making a deep run in the tournament is better just because I think, like we talked about, they could get a matchup and I think they're pretty deep, so they're kind of set to win in a tournament setting.
Mm.
All that being said, I mean, we've got to reevaluate how we look at this Vanderbilt team. That's the type of loss that, and the type of stretch, honestly, that makes you think, man, were we wrong about some stuff early in the
Mhm.
year? And I think I was always a little afraid to declare things about them just because, I don't know, I think we hadn't seen them against teams that could really burn them. They played good teams. I think St. Mary's really good. I think St. Mary's presented a challenge to them by trying to slow them down. SMU has really good guard play. Yet I don't know that we ever saw a team that could really punish them on the inside and uh, could really test their defense on the interior. That's a problem, I think, and I know that they're trying to address that moving forward, but I don't know that even the non-conference schedule changes a whole lot there. I think it's just the way the roster is. I think that's kind of what they're susceptible to, and I almost think we know what they are right now. And if they win five of the next six or they win five in a row here, that doesn't really tell me that they've changed all that much. I think what it tells me is they can beat teams that are like the teams they saw in non-conference play and maybe aren't necessarily second weekend teams because I don't know that they've got a second weekend team here on the upcoming stretch, which is Mississippi State, Kentucky, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, Auburn, Texas A&M. Those are their next couple of games. Missouri, they don't have a game that I project them to lose until maybe Tennessee on February 21st. Like they should win most of these upcoming here. And if they don't, then we really know they've got some problems. That being said, the problems aren't that they're not going to make the tournament or anything like that. I think that's hyperbolic at this point. But Tyler, there's some concerns with the way this thing is built, and I think every team has that. We're finding out now, though, that if Vanderbilt sees a team with a bunch of bruisers and a bunch of athletes down low, then I think that's a tough matchup for them in the NCAA tournament. And if they see that in the round of 32, maybe they deserve to go to the second weekend based off their resume. That's not how this thing works, though. I think they're going to be pretty matchup dependent here.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's going to come down to who they get matched up against. I mean, the current projections I saw earlier today, multiple outlets, bracketologies, whatever you want to call it, had them still as a 3 or 4 seed in the tournament, even after that loss last night. So they don't have to worry about that. But like you mentioned, yes, they might win their first game against a smaller conference champion team, but getting to that second round and even potentially to the Sweet 16 if they get matched up against a team that's more physical than they are, that can out rebound them or can just flat out spread them out on defense, they're going to have trouble defending, they're going to have trouble rebounding, and they might not make it to that second weekend like you said.
Yeah, and I mean that's fine. I don't think the expectation should be that they go to the second weekend. It's not a failure of a season. I'm just saying maybe pump the brakes here a little bit based off
Yeah.
of what had previously been indicated about this team, especially nationally. I think there's a lot of talk about what they actually were. And
Mhm.
I think we found out that they're a good SEC team. I still think there's some things in the way of them being a great team. At this
Mhm.
point, Tyler was a tough night for them in Fayetteville. I think they've got a lot to prove. Saturday against Mississippi State, we'll have you covered very obviously remotely. I don't know that any of us will be able to leave the house for that game, but thank you guys for watching again. We'll talk soon. But until then, God bless and keep on the site, Vandy on SI. God bless. Peace.